It is an honor and a sincere pleasure to be moderating today's conversation with and celebration of new books by Kenneth McRoberts. Introducing highly accomplished scholars and speakers is always a challenge for moderators. In this case, the difficulty of the task is certainly augmented by the enormous breadth and impact of Kenneth McRoberts' contributions to academic leadership, to scholarly research, and to public debate in Canada. So I will underscore just a few highlights. Obtaining his PhD in political science from the University of Chicago, Kenneth McRoberts joined the Department of Political Science at York University in 1969. From 1999 to 2014, he served as the principal of York's Glendon College, where he played a key role in fostering and promoting bilingual post-secondary education and contributed to the establishment of Glendon's School of Public and International Affairs. As a scholar, Dr. McRoberts is recognized and celebrated for offering novel insights on and ultimately bringing clarity to some of the messiest, most challenging, but ultimately defining issues in Canadian social and political life, including linguistic rights, Canadian federalism, and constitutional change. He is also one of the foremost experts on comparative minority nationalisms, a theme of particular importance to our discussion today. Dr. McRoberts has written many highly acclaimed books on these topics, some of which have been translated into French and other languages, as well as countless articles and book chapters. For these and other accomplishments, he was awarded the Prix de la Francophonie de l'Ontario in 2010 and the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Award in 2013, among other recognitions. Today, we celebrate the publication of two books by Kenneth McRoberts, the second edition of Misconceiving Canada, The Struggle for National Unity, and the second edition of Catalonia, The Struggle over Independence. We'll begin with some remarks by Kenneth McRoberts, followed by three shorter presentations by our discussants, who I will briefly introduce now. Albert Carreras is director of the School of International Business, which is affiliated with the Universitat Pompeu Fabra, and full professor at the Department of Economics and Business, also at UPF. From 2011 to 2016, he served as Economic and Finance Secretary and as Secretary General at the Department of Economy and Knowledge, Generalitat de Catalunya. Guy Laforest is a political scientist who worked for 30 years at Université Laval before becoming president of the École nationale d'administration publique from 2017 to 2022. His research interests include understanding Quebec and the Canadian state, nationalism, and federalism. And finally, Michael Keating is Emeritus Professor of Politics at the University of Aberdeen and has written extensively on nationalism and regionalism in Spain, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. His most recent book is State and Nation in the United Kingdom, The Fractured Union, published by Oxford University Press in 2021. Without further ado, I present Kenneth McRoberts.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the generous remarks that Emily offered about my long career. Makes me feel just a little bit old thinking about the various aspects there have been to what I've done in the past. I would like to make some remarks to introduce these two books, provide a bit of context to what I have been doing. But I first should indicate that I had requested months ago that this event should take place remotely, virtually, because there was a possibility that, in fact, I had developed an immunocompromised situation given the medication that I've been following. But on the other hand, the fact that this is a virtual event made it possible for others to participate, others outside Toronto, and I very much appreciate their participation. Even in the case of Europeans, I appreciate the readiness to participate for people from distant locales, and I thank them for that. I would also like to thank the Robarts Center for putting this event together. While I am a former director of the center, that was many, many years ago. And in fact, it goes back to the early 1990s. Back then, I remember thinking that the center had great promise. It had its own source of revenue in particular. and it had a mandate which was very promising as well. And I'm pleased to see how, in fact, Robarts has been flourishing over the last few years. En particulier, je voudrais remercier le directeur du centre, Jean-Michel Mention, de tout ce qu'elle a fait pour rendre possible cet événement. J'ai déjà connu Jean-Michel à Glendon, donc je ne suis pas surpris par l'énergie, l'efficacité et surtout les persévérances qu'il a fait montrer dans l'organisation de cet événement. Par toute évidence, le centre Robarts est un très bon main. Alors, je vous remercie. This launch is in fact a dual launch of two books, both of which are thoroughly revised versions of books that I wrote while I was still based on the Kiel campus, before I had moved to Glendon to become principal. And by the same token, both of these new editions were written after my retirement from Glendon and from the university. In effect, they mark my return in full to scholarly life. I never did leave scholarship completely. While I was principal, I did serve for a year as president of the Canadian Political Science Association. However, while I was principal, and that extended over a period of 15 years, ultimately with 3 terms, I found that I was totally focused upon Glendon and the job of being principal, mainly because Glendon has some unique challenges that I had to confront. Certainly rumblings in high places to the effect that the campus might be sold were enough to focus my mind. So a little opportunity, in fact, to think about scholarship and to develop anything of note by way of scholarship. But with retirement, I at last had the opportunity to devote myself exclusively to scholarship. And in fact, I saw retirement as a permanent sabbatical. Personally, I see revising a book as an opportunity on several fronts. It's an opportunity to correct errors, to get things right for once. It's an opportunity to rewrite the text, to try and present the argument more clearly, if that can be done. But it's also an opportunity to incorporate new material and to vote and to take account of more recent developments. As a result, in the case of Misconceiving Canada, I ended up rewriting much of the original edition, as well as composing 3 entirely new chapters. In the case of the Catalonia book, which was also written in the 1990s, fundamental changes have occurred in Catalan politics, especially the rise of a strong independence movement, leading to a unilateral declaration of independence. So I ended up in revising that book by writing 6 new chapters. So it's basically a new book as far as I'm concerned. The 2 books do have a common theme, namely the challenges of a multinational state and how to deal with the presence of internal nations within a larger state. In the case of Canada, we could identify as internal nations Quebec, Indigenous peoples, and Acadians. In the case of Spain, there are 3 designated historical nations, Catalonia, the Basque Country, and Galicia. One strategy that has been followed by states which have the challenge of dealing with internal nations has been to eliminate them outright. There has been experience along these lines in both Canada and Spain of strategies of elimination as a way of dealing with internal nations. I don't think in Canada the Grand Arrangement des Acadiennes is widely known, but it certainly stands as one of the earliest instances of ethnic cleansing. In the mid-1970s, the British authorities deported about 11,000 Acadians to the British colonies along the Atlantic coast, as well as to Britain and France. And apparently 5,000 people died in the process. In the case of Quebec and Quebec Francophones, the merger of Lower Canada and Upper Canada in 1840 was clearly based upon the notion developed by Lord Durham in his famous report, to the effect that this could lead to the assimilation of Quebec Francophones, or as he said, quote, to obliterate the nationality of the French Canadians, who we saw as a people without literature and without a history. In the case of Indigenous peoples, I think we're familiar with the story of the residential schools and the 60s scoop. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015, in its report, declared that these various initiatives amounted to cultural genocide. The same term has been used in the case of Catalonia in particular, with respect to the strategy that was followed under the Franco regime, which was in effect designed to eliminate Catalonia as a distinct nation. The Catalan language was marginalized to private settings, could not be used in public settings. And in fact, one could not register one's child with a Catalan name. Catalan was not used in schools. It was not a language of education, of instruction. And in general, it was disfavored. There were repeated calls from Catalans to speak the language of the empire, which was Spanish. So oddly enough, the one alternative to eliminating internal nations was to seek to accommodate them. But accommodations can be elusive, unstable, and suddenly seem to come apart. And this has been the case both in Canada and in present day Spain. They are both instances of ongoing systems that incorporated accommodation or partial accommodation of internal nations. They seem to be well established and suddenly appeared to be coming undone. So actually, Canada and Spain have quite a bit in common, despite the fact that, aside from the fact that I developed interest in both of them. In Canada, of course, survived for more than a century. There were two referendums in Quebec. The second one, the 1981, was soundly defeated. However, 1995 was, of course, a squeaker, could have gone either way. I remember this quite vividly because I had entered into an agreement with the Globe and Mail whereby I would prepare two articles, one for a yes vote, one for a no vote, on the assumption that we would know well ahead of time which article to go with. And in fact, that evening, the yes vote was ahead of the no vote in reports that were coming in before, in fact, reports came in from Montreal. And I suddenly had to decide which piece to go with. I went with the no piece, but that, in fact, was probably the more prudent strategy to follow. In the case of Spain, 35 years after the death of Franco, it seemed to be well advanced in the transition to a democratic system. There had been two changes in government parties. In both cases, however, there were remarkable surges in support for independence. In Quebec in 1990, independence went from 34% in 1989 to as high as 56% a year later. Support for an economic association went from 40% in 1989 to 65% a year later. And in the case of Catalonia, there was a sudden surge of support for independence, going from 28% in 2012 to 44.3% in November of 2013. In both cases, it appeared that politicians had to deal with what was a major shift in public opinion and catch up with it. In each case, I think the triggers are clearly evident. In the case of Canada, the trigger was for the surge in support for independence, was the collapse of the Meech Lake Accord in 1990. In the case of Spain, it appears that the trigger was the rejection by the Spanish Constitutional Court of a new statute of autonomy. This court judgment was reached in 2010. And of course, there was the sudden surge in support for independence that I've described. So in fact, what we need probably to think about is political scientists have a theory of critical elections, but we need a theory of critical events. How do certain events have such an extraordinary impact, which makes them critical? And maybe we can get into this issue during the discussion. In retrospect, I think one can see that independence was not a viable alternative in either case. In both cases, the outcome was really determined by, I think, international political economy. In the case of Canada, the real obstacle was the importance to Quebecers of keeping an economic link with Canada. Thus, we ended up with some very contrived questions and complicated questions in both referenda. In the case of Spain, the real challenge for Catalan independence was the uncertainty of any link with the European Union. Spain is a longtime member and made it very clear that it would not approve admission of an independent Catalonia. And in point of fact, no member of the European Union has an interest in Catalan independence. So I would think certainly one can look at the Clarity Act in the case of Canada. One can look at provisions in the Constitution of Spain that talk about the indivisibility of Spain. The fact remains, in political economy terms, the challenges to obstacles to independence were very severe. There is, in fact, an alternative to independence, multinational federalism, which would involve recognizing multinationality, but adopting federalism. And the argument of the two books is simply put that Canada needs to recognize that it is a multinational federation and has always been one. And Spain, I would say, needs to become one, needs to become a multinational federation. And in the concluding chapter of the book on Catalonia, I spent some time spelling out what exactly this would entail if Spain were to become a multinational federation, which is a bit nervy for somebody not based in Spain, a non-Spaniard, to be proposing. But nonetheless, that is how I concluded the book. So on this note, I'll call upon our moderator to initiate the rest of the proceedings.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken, for presenting or giving us a précis of these two books that really speak remarkably well to each other and to themes that are of critical importance to the current political moment in Canada and in Spain. So I will turn it over now to our discussants, starting with Albert Carreras. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Emily. For me, it's a pleasure and an honor having been invited to this discussion. As I was stressing in giving my quick CV to Emily. I wanted to make very clear that I'm not a political scientist here, but I am simply a person that happened to be in the middle of the 19 the decade when most of the crisis and the search for independence was going on. So this was because simply I that at that moment was dean at the economic and business school of my university, had to switch to manage austerity policies in the best possible way for a number of years, and was completely captured by all the dynamism and all the conflicts that that appear in that moment. And when it happened that I met Professor McRoberts, who was interested in having a talk with me because somebody else told him that I was writing the chronicle, the memories of the years in government. For me, it was a discovery of how many things I was learning simply by looking at what I was experiencing in my life, but looking at this with political scientist eyes, with political scientists from the distance, and with a global view on what was happening. So it was a big pleasure that involved me completely in enjoying, in reading quickly the first McRoberts book on Catalonia, the one on the building of a nation without a state, nation building without a state. That's really the precedent, but has been completely changed when he told me that was he simply preparing a second edition. Now the second edition is a completely new book. That's the majority, the clear majority of the pages of the former book, and chronicles very well what has happened from 2000 to 2020-21. And that at the end of the first book, Professor McRoberts was describing really that the efforts to do the nation building without a state were quite successful. In fact, they were amazingly successful. And just by 2000, the winds of history changed completely. And a new government, a new Popular Party government, right-wing Spanish nationalist government, got the full majority in the Spanish parliament, and started to do a very quick reverse of all the doors opened by the Spanish Constitution in 1978. And I think one of the major merits of Kenneth McRoberts' book is that he focused perfectly well on this turning point and all the elements that were around it. So who were the most interested in doing this? Why were they doing this? How were the reactions? This political scientist's eye, seen from a place like Canada, is all the time fresh air in all what we have been experiencing. This is why now, well, since I met him, I was publicizing that this is compulsory reading for us, that we would have done things much better with a much closer attention of what this perspective could provide. And even now we can perform much better if we read and learn what he's suggesting us to do in a much better way. There is a very close attention to the details in the historical development. This is very important, but without leaving any instant, any moment to pay due attention to the overall general contextual elements. And these were the world politics, European politics, Spanish politics, as well as the grassroots politics in Catalonia. So all the elements that were in conflict. So those things that political scientists like so much to do and that historians always dream to do, were all of them present there, with the difference for somebody like me and many others of my generation and my country, that it's about us. So it's not about something else, it's about us, but seen from outside. And I think that collectively we have to be very grateful, because the clear difference with others is that there is both empathy and distance. a professional academic view, but without any prejudgment against. And so some of the toughest things that Professor Mike Roberts has to convey to Catalans looking for independence is that he says that, but guys, this is impossible. It was impossible, it is impossible, and it will be impossible. Let's switch to better investments. Try to create occasions when you can improve your self-government without going back again into a repressive situation. So my many thanks as Catalan, as a person in Catalan academia, and as a person that was witness of everything that was happening. We have had a lot of light, of high quality, of a lot of detail, and for us it's and it will be, once it will be translated, a major difference in terms of shared knowledge within Catalonia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the speakers for making my job easier and sticking to the timeline here. Next up, we have Guy Laforest. Over to you.
Merci, Émilie, et bonjour tout le monde. Je suis vraiment heureux de participer à cette séance, à ce webinaire autour des travaux de Ken McRoberts et de revoir des collègues avec qui j'ai pu partager plein d'expériences au cours des 30-40 dernières années. So in the few minutes that I have, I will try to give context. I'm sorry, this is something that's going on with my telephone. I should have put it off completely. So let me come back to the essence here. So I want first to say a few things general about the work that Ken has done, but essentially I want to be critical of him. When I started in Calgary in 1986, Barry Cooper, a political philosopher, gave me a book with a red pen, and he told me, don't tell me I'm good, I know I'm good, but help me to get better. So let me try to challenge Ken and make a couple of points suggesting how his own reflections on Quebec, Canada, Spain, and Catalonia, beyond his formidable books, could get better. First of all, let me talk about his contributions. It seems to me, and here, Emily, I am paraphrasing your book on France and Quebec. I think that one of the great contributions of Ken's two books is that they unveil the nature, sources, and rigidities of state nationalism in Canada and Spain. Nationalism is not the monopoly of Quebec, Catalonia, or Scotland. There is an immensely powerful state nationalism, and Ken shows us how it is at work in both Canada and Spain. One of these dimensions of this state nationalism is that it is linked to political philosophy. It is linked to an understanding of constitutional patriotism, of political liberalism. And once in Madrid, I heard this vision of liberal citizenship from the perspective of state nationalism, and it was presented as impeccable liberal citizenship. But actually, it's not that impeccable in the ways in which it treats minorities. Rather, it is implacable. And this is very much at work, particularly in Spain, with regards to the PP, the conservative understanding of state nationalism. And it's a great contribution of Ken to show that. Let me add that in terms of intellectual history, Ken belongs to a group of political scientists and historians in Canada that have given over the years a tremendous amount of their research and work to the study of Quebec and Canada, but particularly Quebec. I won't give the titles here, but I have in mind Michael Keating's work, Bob Young, Garth Stevenson, and I'll come back to Garth in my conclusion. So to the crunch of my points here, first of all, I think that Ken should tell us more. He doesn't tell us enough, particularly in his Catalonia book, of the relationships between Quebec and Catalonia for him as a scholar. we can glimpse that his book on Catalonia is influenced by the work he has done on Quebec, but he is not explicit about it. He should tell us more about that for himself, and he should be more explicit about the things that Catalonia over the years, particularly on the linguistic side, has taken from Quebec. My second point, I don't think that political economy is the real reason. The reason I believe that makes the independence of either Quebec or Catalonia extraordinarily improbable is not political economy. It is a vision of the modern state about the quasi-indivisibility of its territory, the fact that it's extraordinarily difficult for Canada to imagine itself without the territory of Quebec, and for Spain to imagine itself without the territory of Catalonia. So to me, that's the heart of the matter. And I would add, with regards to Aboriginal peoples, that it is evident, in particular, not only with regards to the focus on reconciliation, but with the place of Aboriginal peoples in the territory of Quebec, that this is an immense obstacle for Quebec's independence. So I won't quote what you can find. I have 1 minute left on page 313, which is where Ken expounds his vision of what Spain would look like if it would become a plurinational federation. Now, I've contributed to that narrative, but it seems to me that this narrative is built on the coherence and clarity of political science, but it does not take into account sufficiently the contextual origins of the state in question that make such a thing as how multinational federalism is conceived by Ken utterly impossible in the Spanish context. So what should we contribute in a particular context is what Ken does not tell us at the end of his book. So finally, my last point, and back to Stevenson, for me, in case of Canada and Quebec and the evolution, particularly of the way in which, in the context of the last decade, Quebec has been seen outside of Canada, to me, the example is not Catalonia. To me, the example is Belfast. I think that there's a way in which Canadian unionism, its aggressivity vis-a-vis Quebec for the future, we shouldn't think about Catalonia and Spain. We should think about Irish unionism, British unionism, and Belfast should be a metaphor that we give more time to. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Guy. And we'll have a chance to tackle some of those questions, I think, in the Q&A portion. Next up, we have Michael Keating. Over to you.
Thanks, Emily. I've known Ken on and off for about 25 years. I first met him when I was living in Canada in the 1990s, but the most intensive interaction we had was in a few weeks in Barcelona some years ago when we were both on research trips and spent many an agreeable evening over a beer or Catalan food discussing our mutual interests there. And picking up Guy's invitation to learn from one case to another, I must say I learned a tremendous amount from Ken's analysis for Canada for the cases I was looking at, which included the United Kingdom and Spain as well. And reciprocally, I think those study of the UK and Spain shares a great light upon Catalonia. You mentioned my book. If I'm allowed the privilege of plugging my own book for just a minute, published last year about the United Kingdom, State and Nation in the United Kingdom, the Fractured Union. I could have called that Misconceiving the United Kingdom, because this really was what the book was all about, how unionism in the United Kingdom has completely lost the plot, is making all the mistakes that Canadian Federalists, or as we would call them unionists, Spanish unionists, and they are now calling themselves unionists, have made. So there is a great deal we can learn across these cases. So I want to say just a little bit about the United Kingdom and how the sort of analysis that Ken has brought to bear on Catalonia and the Quebec questions really have great relevance to what's happening right now, not in the past, but as we speak in the United Kingdom, faced with the attempt to reconstitute the United Kingdom as a unitary nation state in the aftermath of Brexit. In the book, I try to clarify the difference between a multinational or plurinational union and a nation state. This is what Ken gets at in his book about Misconceiving Canada. This is a mistake that Trudeau made, that yes, it's a federation, but it's a single national, a uninational state. And that distinction between a plurinational union and a nation state, I think, is more important for our purposes than the distinction between federalism and a unitary state. That's the key one, is multinational or plurinational federalism, or indeed multinationalism within a state that's not formally federal, as neither the United Kingdom nor Spain are. And I identified a number of key factors that differentiate a union from a nation state. And one is about the demos, that is, who are the people? Is there a single demos, or are there multiple peoples? In the United Kingdom, there's not a single demos. It's not even that there are neatly nested demi in Scotland, Wales, England, and Ireland, because the nations that constitute the union themselves are multiple and complicated. Indeed, this is the case in Spain and in Canada as well. And Brexit illustrates the failure by British unionism to recognize this, because British politicians are continually saying the United Kingdom, the British people voted to leave the European Union, conjuring into existence a demos that never existed and certainly didn't express itself as a unitary voice with regard to Brexit, because we in Scotland didn't vote for Brexit, nor did the people of Northern Ireland. The second one is telos, which is about the purpose of the state, the historical trajectory, the past and the future, and the extent to which we share a vision of our constitutional destiny. And some constitutions are based upon unity, the fact that we're in agreement about where we are, the nature of the state. Other constitutions are based upon the fact that we disagree about that and we have to accommodate it. It's just a fact of life. And in a plurinational union, that question about the telos, where we're going, is permanently left open and can never be resolved. And I lived in Canada in an era when they thought they could resolve the constitutional question. Now I understand, we realize you can't resolve it. You might as well not try. It's something you simply got to live with. But in Spain, of course, they keep on trying to close the constitutional question. And in the United Kingdom, they're trying to do the same thing. The third element is what I call ethos. This is about values. And we're constantly being told that to be a good Brit, you have to subscribe to British values. The only bit of the United Kingdom where anybody uses this phrase, by the way, is England. It's never used elsewhere. But these are British values. And in order to be a good Democrat, you've got to be British. In order to be British, you've got to be a good Democrat. This recalls the Trudeau doctrine about the Charter of Rights and so on being somehow linked to a Canadian nation-building project. We've got exactly the same thing here. And the problem is not that these values, democracy and fair play, are universal. They are universal. The point is that they're also shared by Scottish and Welsh and Irish nationalists. And so the idea that one national project can appropriate those values and say they are to do with nation building is common to what happened in Canada under the elder Trudeau, what happened in Spain, and what is happening in Spain, and what is happening in the United Kingdom. In fact, values across the United Kingdom are converging, but it doesn't mean that we all have to feel British in the same way. That is a completely different question. The final element is about sovereignty and whether sovereignty belongs all in one place. So one can conceive in a philosophical sense as well as a practical sense about dividing sovereignty and shared sovereignty. And this is central to the argument in Canada, in Spain, and the United Kingdom, that there's got to be a pluralism all the way down. It's not just that there is, as the British government says, a principle of parliamentary sovereignty. We lend power to Scotland and Wales, but we can take it back at any time. We've got to think about sovereignty as being fundamentally something that is divisible, something that is relational, something that is not absolute and belonging all in one place. Well, what's happening in the United Kingdom and why they should learn from Ken's work is that Brexit was conceived as a project to have a single demos, a single telos, a single ethos, and a single point of sovereignty in relation both to Europe and to the internal constitution of the United Kingdom. It's an impossible dream because the world isn't like that, but it's a powerful project and it's leading to tremendous conflict in the United Kingdom with no clear resolution. And within the broad context of the European Union, it was possible for these multiple conceptions of the United Kingdom to coexist, because that's exactly what the European Union is. It's a plurinational union in which you don't have unity of demos, telos, ethos, or sovereignty. These things are constantly negotiated and constantly worked out and can never be resolved, but can be accommodated through constitutional politics, which is not just ordinary day-to-day politics, kind of meta-politics, and accepting that the rules of the game require mutual tolerance, mutual recognition, and a willingness to compromise and to not make questions of sovereignty and nationality into absolutes. So that's really what I learned from Ken. It was a clarification of things that I'd been thinking about. And I do think the cases that Ken has been writing about, in the case of the United Kingdom and other cases as well, could really learn from each other. So I'm really delighted to see these books into the second edition. I have both of them on my bookshelves, and I've really learned a great deal from them.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, to Ken and our three discussants for offering these comments and kicking off the discussion for us. Maybe I'll kick things off by building a little bit on some of the themes that were brought up in these discussant comments and posing a couple of questions to Ken about them, or giving you a chance to respond. It seems we have a couple of themes sort of emerging, one around choice of cases, right? Guy Laforest was asking about, what's the relationship between these two societies? How do you go about, what is it that draws them together beyond your interest in the two? And what about the prospect of other comparisons, for example, to Scotland or, to what's going on in the United Kingdom more broadly? Any thoughts about that? And then the other broad theme seems to be really about context and, what is in the realm of possibility when you have these institutionalized, these national imaginaries, I think that Guy was referring to, that have become institutionalized over decades, and sort of there's an established way of engaging. And in Michael's comments about demos, telos, ethos, that sort of shape the contextual field in which compromises are and are not possible around sort of institutionalizing plurinationality. So do you have any reactions about, what, in the end of your book on Catalonia, as you mentioned, you sort of offer these possibilities for the future, but what are sort of the impediments or obstacles to that future that you're envisioning, and what are the chances of seeing change in the context of these sort of deeply entrenched narratives and institutions?
I believe this question is directed to me. And my thought would be that, and I actually can see how in a particular context that exists, the notion of a multinational federation is quite idealist and be very difficult to achieve. The question becomes whether there are particular policies that might might be possible in the situation which presently exists of a socialist minority government in Madrid and a collection of independentist parties occupying the Generalitat and continually squabbling over their particular interests as parties. The key issues that seem to be in any negotiations between Catalonia and Madrid have to do with the possibility of a referendum on independence and the possibility of a generalized amnesty for those who led the independence struggle. In the case of a referendum, it's a bit incomprehensible, I think, for Canadians, that in fact a referendum on independence should not be possible, since we've had two of them. And in the case of Spain, the position has been on the part of both the Socialists and the Partido Popular that this is not possible under the Constitution, which does in fact talk about the indivisibility of Spain. So that would be an area in which perhaps some progress could be made it would entail some degree of constitutional revision, perhaps, but in the more limited terms of not the construction of a federal system, since I don't think Spain is a federal system, but possibility at least of a sounding of opinion on the question of independence.
I think Guy Laforest has an intervention to make on this theme as well.
Well, looking at time, that's going to be my last intervention. Again, in his book on Canada, and by the way, I wholeheartedly agree with the 99% of Ken's analysis, but he defines the victory for the Trudeau vision that he explains very well. The victory of the Trudeau vision is that it becomes entrenched in the hearts and minds of a majority of Francophone Quebecers. To me, that's wrong. The victory of the Trudeau vision is, let's say, it maintains the territorial integrity of Canada. It is dominant in the minds of most people outside of Quebec, and it is entrenched in a sufficient number of people in Quebec, in Montreal, in the English-speaking community, but elsewhere, it is sufficiently present there to contribute to impede independence. If it does that, all these things, to me, it is immensely successful.
I agree that the Trudeau vision has not become entrenched in the hearts and minds of Quebec Francophones. I think it has become entrenched within the Constitution, and that has the effect of precluding any kind of fundamental change which would serve to offset the Trudeau vision. And I think there is a kind of institutional paralysis which probably would be quite acceptable for Trudeau, that this Constitution as it stands could in fact endure for centuries and preclude the possibility of any kind of fundamental change to something that would be more along the lines of a multinational recognition.
I have a question on that theme of the Trudeau vision and its entrenchment. I'm sort of curious to what extent you think, and this is the challenge of sort of, you probably need to have a third edition of these books in about 5 years because the terrain is often shifting, but to what extent do you think we're witnessing a kind of undoing of the Trudeau legacy or vision right now in Canada? I'm thinking of the sort of failure of bilingualism across the country, evidenced by the recent Stats Canada report showing how few, that bilingualism outside of Quebec is in decline. The fact that we have more and more provincial governments sort of wielding the notwithstanding clause or threatening to wield the notwithstanding clause to secure their agendas, or the fact that we have the emergence of these sort of radical decentralization campaigns in Alberta, for example, during the leadership race to run the United Conservative Party of Alberta. Multiculturalism has sort of undergone challenges over the years, though it probably remains more secure than these other sort of facets of the Trudeau legacy. But would you say that we're entering a new era, sort of in which the terms of Canadian identity and governance are being sort of fundamentally renegotiated, or not?
I think these are interesting points, particularly the rehabilitation of the notwithstanding clause, which was not part of the Trudeau vision, and in effect he had to accept a bit reluctantly, has been used quite widely by other provinces, or threatened to use them in a way that suggests that it hasn't become illegitimate in the way that some at the time had hoped would be the case. At the same time, I think the Trudeau vision has become under attack over the question of bilingualism. And I'm not sure it ever was really an issue of personal bilingualism, which may become part of the vision. But certainly if we look at the data on the presence of Francophone society outside Quebec, the most recent census would suggest a significant decline, further decline of a pattern that was already in place over a period of time. And at the same time, no real change with respect to the proportion of the population which is bilingual in English and French. So that element of the division perhaps has not really become entrenched in the way that one might have hoped. But the notwithstanding clause, which was in effect a detraction from the Trudeau vision, has become more generally discussed and threatened and used in a way that might seem surprising.
Maybe one final question. Do you look to other cases when thinking about, there's this remarkable parallel when reading both books about how, in this period of the sort of late 1970s, early 1980s, both of these countries are establishing their constitutions and rejecting, a real solid recognition of these internal nations. And that sort of sets them on a course that I think you suggest had a lot to do with why we've seen sort of vibrant secessionist movements emerge in both of these contexts. Do you look to other societies for examples of success in institutionalizing a kind of recognition that can hold these disparate national societies within a single nation state? Or how do you sort of what are some success stories that would be exemplary in thinking about this?
There aren't a lot of success stories to point to. Switzerland is often presented as a case of a successful multinational state, but I don't think the components of Switzerland can be categorized as nations. Belgium might come closer. Canada actually is a success story as a multinational state, but it hasn't sufficiently recognized this. And I think there is a kind of an institutional blockage which prevents a full recognition.
Well, with that, I think I will conclude the Q&A. We just have 2 minutes left. Thank you so much to our keynote speaker, Ken McRoberts, for being with us today and for these terrific books that I recommend to all who are in the audience today, and also to our discussants for providing their perspectives. I will turn it over to Jean-Michel Monsiyon to just close up our session today.
Thank you so much, Emily, for facilitating this event. Ken, of course, for sharing your insights. It's amazing that this is technically a revised versions, but they really sound like new reads. So I'm looking forward to reading your books. Thank you, Albert, Guy, and Michael, for engaging comments and conversation, and for you all to attend with us today.